All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are joining us. Thank you, TK, for the Tamika, for the introduction. My name is Ben Williams, Digital Solutions Specialist here at Stiles Machinery. I will be talking about MMR today, but also a little bit more than that. Specifically, not just MMR. We'll use MMR as the tool for us to dive into a topic that we're going to talk about today. I want to get through some of these bullet points here, and then we'll explain a little bit more. We'll explore MMR Office and data capture capabilities. So what that means is your machines are operating, they're making dust, as we like to say, but how are they doing that efficiently? That's the next question. And how do you know? What state is the machine in? And at any given moment in time, how much idle time do you have? Warning messages or errors, faults, these types of things. How do you know what it is, when it occurred, how long it took to resolve? So overall, how can I improve the production process? From getting answers to all those questions. Again, MMR is the tool. It's a piece of software, which we'll be talking more about here, be using that to answer some of those questions. But more importantly, I think a big takeaway I want people to have from this as well is a business intelligence or increased business intelligence, things to look for, things to think about as we run production, run our companies and our operations. Where can we be more efficient? And how do we recognize those things? It has a lot to do with think about it as like Six Sigma or Lean, for example. These are terms that we use. We won't be talking specifically about those items, but it's all kind of in that same umbrella as business intelligence. Fortunately, you don't have to be a statistician now either in order to get into business intelligence. So don't let that concern you or worry you. You don't have to be a mathematician to know this, to measure these things. And that circles back to MMR. That is why we're using MMR, is because it does the math for us. So you'll be able to see some of that stuff as we get in here. So at the conclusion of our session, right, you'll be able to define MMR Office, identify its primary features. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about that. Here we talked about business intelligence. Okay, so we'll be able to, hopefully you'll leave with a better understanding of what business intelligence is and how you can improve the production process. And analyze various machine statuses and understand some of the standard KPIs. And KPI is short for Key Performance Indicator. For anybody that has visited us at Stiles Machinery, an example of this are the televisions that we have hanging throughout our facilities and the different business units and different departments as we monitor that business activity. And those are KPI dashboards, Key Performance Indicator dashboards. And MMR is really close to that same type of thing, but for machinery. So MMR stands for Machine Monitoring and Reporting. The key thing here to know is, and I mentioned some statistics earlier, is MMR does not do any statistical analysis. It does exactly what those words are. It monitors the machinery and reports their activity. So we'll get into how that's beneficial, and then you can do some of the statistics offline if you choose to. But just monitoring and reporting machine activity, you'll see is enough to keep things interesting, I'll put it that way. So rather than make everyone sit through a PowerPoint here, for this whole thing, I'm going to fire up the actual software, and you'll be able to see MMR. We'll start with the title screen of the software here. So I'm going to open this up here. I'm going to drag it into the window. All right, everybody should be seeing the MMR open here. You should see 4 machines. You should see some different colors that we have going there. There's actually a little bit of science behind this as well. In map making or cartography, they use color coding to indicate elevation. And that's actually the scientific word for it is hypsometric tinting. And that basically means we're using color to indicate importance of something, as in you'd see like a green light means you go. Red light means stop. Yellow light means caution, right? Or pay attention to this thing. So kind of that same concept we have going on here with MMR. Now, when you first open up MMR, this is the KPI dashboard screen that you have here. And everything is powered by this little area up here. This is our date range of the production data that we're running here. So if we go in here, we can change, you can set times if you want. This is time, you can set it by date range. This is a full week's worth of production last week. Okay, you have some other options you can set in here. If you prefer to look at it a different way, you usually do from date to date. So for people during demonstrations, because it's just more straightforward. So what this does is after you set the date and time here, it pulls in all the data and displays all the data throughout all these tabs at the bottom of the screen here, specifically for this date and time period. So that's going to be an important element to remember is if you want to go back, you know, weeks or months, you can do that and it'll pull in all that data and you can see all that back history. So for the purposes of this demo here, we're just looking at data for this date range right here, which I believe is full week's worth of production last week, okay? And this is real demo data. I get this on a weekly export from a company in France. They were kind enough to lend us their data here. And we use these guys for a couple reasons that we'll go into more in depth as I go through the different views here. So when you first open up MMR, this is what you get. You just get a really high level overview on a machine by machine basis here. Okay, so it just gives you a quick overview of, okay, what should I be looking for, or what do I see trending on a machine by machine basis here. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of direction on where you should go look first. Now on this screen you see all 4 machines, which is F3, it's this button down here. If I go to the next screen in, we peel back the first layer of the onion, so to speak, and this brings us into our individual machines. So this screen right here represents this single machine. So again, the previous screen, you could see all 4. In this particular screen, you've got all 4 of them listed in the drop-down, but you can only see 1 machine in this view, okay? Now this dives in and it starts to break out some of those different machine statuses, if you will. Now, if you see here, main usage exceedance, which I'll explain some of these in a moment. You got secondary usage, idle time, there's your warnings, error messages, maintenance. These statuses, so MMR is monitoring the statuses of the machines. So in other words, if I, myself, Ben, orders some cabinets from Tamika's Cabinetry, I'm just making this up, it's not going to monitor the job. It's not going to monitor Ben's order as it travels through the system. But what it's going to do is it's just looking at how's the machinery operating and what are they doing throughout a span of time. So that's one question I get, is it doesn't monitor the job. This particular solution does not. This just focuses on the machine states, okay? So the first thing that you'll see here, and this is probably as close to a statistic in this software as you're gonna get, is OEE. This is a buzzword. They use this in a lot of other industries that are out there. Automotive is one area that you'll find it, and then in some other manufacturing aspects. But OEE is short for overall equipment efficiency. And when I hover over this, you can see the formula. So like for performance level, so primary operating level times performance level times quality standard, that's the formula. But for example, the performance level is a formula in itself nested inside this formula. So I won't go too specifically into that. I don't want to put you guys to sleep too much going down the statistics rabbit hole, but OEE on a HOMAG machine, again, overall equipment efficiency, HOMAG says you need to shoot for about 80%, okay? If you're doing more than 80%, you're doing great. The demo data that I get from these guys, I'm consistently seeing 80% on average. Sometimes it dips a little below. but this is one of their main, workhorse machines that they use that they have on MMR. Now, so 80% is considered real world, like that's as close to 100% as you're going to get. We would all love to have 100% efficiency on a machine, but you've got the real life, you've got some handling time, idle time, you've got some warning messages, some maintenance and things like that. So, that's real world stuff. So your yield, your parts, this is just a section that gives you some info on parts production, again, during this time period here, because remember, everything in MMR is powered through this time period. Gives you some info on waste. And again, we kind of talked about this little area over here, just kind of represents the pie chart here. Now, what's also cool is you can drag, I don't have Excel open, but if I click, you can drag this and drop it into Excel, drag and drop into Excel, all of these things. So you could drag and drop into Excel, and you'll actually populate an Excel spreadsheet. So you could go through and drag and drop and put together your own custom reports that way if you want. You can also export all of the production data for every machine in MMR during this date range, or whatever date range you set here. You can export that. You don't need any APIs, just export it here into some people that use like a manufacturing execution system of one form or another that they could feed that into. Some people just like to build their own custom reports as well, so you can do that through the export feature. All right, let's so this is interesting. This machine got a little bit of idle time here, some material secondary operation, which is like setup or material handling on this particular machine, and then the main usage of the machine. So it's overall that's a pretty good looking pie chart in terms of the machine and its efficiency during this period of time. I'm gonna pick on another machine here. I like to pick on edge banders because they give us a slightly different piece of information than a CNC would give us. Okay, first thing I look at on this screen, OEE is 41%. Okay, well that's a little bit shy of the 80% that HOMAG recommends. Now, having me show you this, now we're going to talk more specifically about your business intelligence. This is where you can start asking questions. You can start seeing things that are happening at the machine. So we'll walk through this example. So 41%, I'm like, okay, well, if I'm supposed to be at 80, technically it's half as efficient as it should be, right? So why is that? Well, okay, so 32.9% of the time, the belt is running. All right, I'm sending parts through. We're doing good. We're rocking. We're making some stuff. We're edge banding some stuff. Now, edge banders output an interesting category here. It's green, but it's shaded. Okay, and they call that main usage exceedance. So 19.4% of the time. So what this means is your belt is running on the machine. It's technically in its primary operating function. You can edge band a part. However, the pin has dropped on this edge bander and there is no piece going through the edge bander. So if I'm a production manager or a business owner, I'm curious about this data. I'm looking at these things. I'm curious to know why the machine is running, but I don't have any parts going through the machine. So it's on, the belt's running, it's ready. There's just no parts going through. The other thing I'm curious about too is my idle time. I've got a 25.8% idle time, which means the belt isn't running, the machine's on, control power on, but for whatever reason, it's just hanging out. So do I not have parts? Okay, so that's a question I might ask is where's my bottleneck in the process? Why, or do I have parts, we're just not running them? How is my operator working or not working with this machine? So if you look at this and look at this, right, now you can start to understand why your overall equipment efficiency is so low, because you just don't have that much time spent in the primary operating function of that machine, actually edge banding parts. Let's just look at the saw. This will be the last one here. Yeah, geez. Now this is better, right? Closer to 80, okay? But you do have a good chunk of idle time there. So if you could shave this down, then you'll probably be in much better shape. You do have quite a big chunk of blue here, which I'm led to believe, and I don't know this for a fact unless I talk to these folks, is you probably have a lot of really small pieces that are getting cut, I'm guessing, because it takes a while to either do the job setup or handle the material coming on or off that machine. So that's a possibility. Again, MMR doesn't tell you that per se, but it gives you a good idea or a better idea of where to look for those types of that type of information, right? You start asking questions about where to go and look. All right, we'll move over to the next one now. Okay, this is our interval comparison here. Now, this particular customer, so every HOMAG machine with Power Touch that's at least within the last 3 to 5 years old in that time frame, all comes with MMR Basic. Okay, MMR Basic is on the machine that pulls all of this data, or at least pools all this data. And then this is MMR Office that goes and fetches that data, okay? So what's happening here is this customer has what's called MMR Pro on the machine, which is an upgraded version of MMR Basic. Again, Basic and Pro are at the machine. So Pro on the machine, on any HOMAG Power Touch machine, allows customers to do a couple of things. The first is they can log users in by shift. So if you're running multiple shifts and you want to keep track of the person who's running, again, this is a French company, that's why we got, you know, some names we might not recognize here as traditional per se in the US. But because all these folks are on different shifts, they can log in and out at the machine using soft keys as a function of MMR Pro, and that information is recorded in as a shift in MMR Office, which we're looking at here. If it did not have MMR Pro on the machines, this would all be blank. They can still click it, nothing would be here, but they would have day, week, and month as well. So what's interesting about the shift information here, okay, is you can see this individual here logged on for about 8 hours. You can see the data coming out of the machine during their shift. So you can start, you know, so you see somebody that's running the machine that is habitually maybe kind of struggling with the operation of the machine, or, you know, might need some additional training. If you see a lot of idle time, you know, that might be something to look into. Let's go into the day. Okay, so for this CNC machine, you're looking at days worth of data here. And again, there's a couple of weekend days that are capped in between here. So data looks kind of funny. But as you notice, our shift names are gone. Okay, now we have just days. We just have dates going through here. Okay, and then you can see those individual, the data on an individual or daily basis rather than a shift basis. Let's look at our edge bander. Let's just see what we got going on here. Okay, so consistently quite a bit of idle time. That's across the board here. We have also some overall equipment efficiency scores are pretty close to the same. So I would look at this now as far as business intelligence. I'm looking at patterns. Okay, I'm trying to look at what's happening on a regular occurrence, a regular basis. So I can go ahead and look at that and say, okay, well, is this just an isolated incidence, or is this something that requires more systemic analysis to try to figure out what's going on here? So I would say your idle time on this machine is pretty systemic. You got quite a bit of time in there, okay? And it'll actually tell you get 21%, 23, 30, 25, 30. So that's quite a bit of idle time during these working hours. So that I would be looking at that as something, as a possibility, as something to improve. Same thing with the saw. We got some idle time in here. Your OEE is a little bit better. That depends on what parts you're cutting. And then here's your primary operating state. I'm gonna go back to our CNC real quickly here. I'm gonna quick week. Okay, so here's the week's worth of data. OEE goes up to 81.4, and then you can see on the month, which will just be a single stack. Yep, there it is. So you could set your, now this is just a week's worth of data, so it's not going to be any different than this bubble here. But if you had changed this setting up here, if we had a month, then you might, you know, and we went to weekly view, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks here, right? With a month, you just have one stack here. So that's how to use this particular section of the software. We'll move on next to our next graph over here. From a business intelligence standpoint, this doesn't necessarily tell us to do anything specifically per se, but what this is showing us is our yield, which is our parts production in blue, versus the overall equipment efficiency of the machine. So when our machine is running really efficiently, what's our parts production during that period of time? I would look for, in this particular graph, if I wanted to analyze something, I would look for deviations where we have a really big separation between what's happening on an efficiency standpoint and then our parts per hour. And again, this might be a good, you're at 95% efficiency, you're roughly making 6.73 parts per hour. Why is that, right? So then you can go in and look at the job that you were cutting during that period of time, because you've got some of that detail down here. And then you can start to ask those questions. You can also click and drag, zoom in on certain sections, okay? And it'll change the way the graph looks a little bit because you're zoomed in on that section. But then you can start to see, well, what happened down here? We weren't making anything, so our efficiency obviously is gonna be low. Same thing over here. So again, look for the large deviations and, maybe you wonder why, but consistently you want your efficiency to be pretty high in this graph. Go to the next one here. Now I think this one is pretty interesting. This might be our $1 million one here, value, I think. So this is showing us 40% of this machine's time is spent using the right table. 59% of this machine's time is during this date range is spent doing both of these things. So your main usage left and right. 76% is spent within these three categories here. So 100% of the machine's time during this date range period here is spent doing these activities. So if you want to say, well, give me, 95% of the time, what's my machine doing? Well, it's doing these 6 things right here in descending order. What to look for on this graph is, if I'm a production manager, I want my green columns to be as far to the left as possible and as tall as possible. If you get into a situation where, let's just see if I can find something that looks kind of bad, relatively speaking. Like this right here, this was our edge bander, where you got 32%, you're in that primary usage. You're making dust, you're edge banding stuff. But then you've got idle time right behind it, and then you've got that primary exceedance right here. That's something you'd have to ask yourself, is this common? Am I okay with this? If I'm not okay with this much idle time, what can I do to kind of tamp down on that? So this graph allows you to see, again, in descending order, the thing that's happening the most common on the machine, and then gives you some insight and maybe into your imagination as to what to do with that. This right here, not great. They've got idle time is the primary, is the main state of the machine during this period of time. So I would be wondering why, right? So then you can go watch the production process and see if you can figure that out. I mentioned something earlier about MMR Pro, which again is an upgrade to basic at the machine. The other thing that MMR Pro allows you to do is add custom machine states, okay? As you see right here, you got 2, this is just an example of what this customer does. If you had basic at the machine, you would just see idle time arbitrary, which is an aggregation it takes all the different things that the machine thinks are idle time and puts them into one category automatically. Now, you see shortage of material here. This is a function of MMR Pro that allows the customer to change the state of the machine or control the state of the machine manually using soft keys and indicate the reasons why. So if I am an operator, I can go in here and say, oh, I'm idle right now. I don't want it to look like I'm just hanging out per se. I want to be able to say, I've got a shortage of material here so I can record that. So somebody has gone in here during this time period with a soft key at the machine and said, I'm idle because I've got a shortage of material here. Now, the operator needs to know, needs to remember, because it's a manual process, needs to remember to go into the machine and change that setting. So that's kind of a caveat to that. It's not automated, okay? Same thing, you can see machine fault, you can see repair down here, okay? This is a custom field that they've opted to create to report different error messages at the machine. So just something to consider, MMR Pro versus the basic. Now let's go in here. This is our next graph here. I'm going to look for one that doesn't look particularly good during this date period here, or at least I want to try to find something with an error. That's what I want right there. So this shows you the different states of the machine, again, through this date period. And you can see the dates, the time and date alignment down here, okay? And I would use this graph to look for things like this. I would say, okay, we got a big error message down here. What seems to be the issue here? So what you can do is you can click and drag and release, and it'll zoom in on that error for you. And if you have, again, this is another function of MMR Pro, which is pretty nice. If you double click this, and again, some of this might be in a different language, but you could double click that and it'll go fetch the explanation for you as to why why that machine is has been in an error state. I'll give it just a second to update here. I want it to pull the information here. There we go. So you can see right here that in descending order by time, what that machine was doing in that error state. So 0.87 hours was spent with this particular issue right here. Again, some of it's in different language, but you get the idea as to what this report does for you. It starts to break that stuff out for you in descending order by time. Okay, so that's kind of handy. In our service and tech support, people love that stuff too, because it just helps them diagnose faster for you what could potentially be the issue with the machine. And slightly kind of related in the same neighborhood as the error messages here. If I click this little exclamation point, this is all error messages for the machine during this period of time right here, okay? So in descending order, so you can see I spent 8.39 hours in this particular error message right here, and then it allows you to see, okay, if I'm seeing the same error message happen over and over and over again here for really long periods of time, then that's something that's could systemically be a problem. So this is really MMR in a pretty broad overview that we just finished up here. We just got through, but the important thing to walk away from here is, or one of the important things to come away with is, how can I start to notice, when my machines aren't running efficiently? What do I do with that information? How do I get it? How do I, what are the different states of my machines? And when I, shy of sticking my head out the door and just, saying, hey, how's it going? And everyone gives the thumbs up, that's not really giving me the insight that I'm looking for when it comes to being efficient with our equipment and making sure that we're doing the right maintenance and, looking at when we have an issue, how we're getting through that. So that is MMR. I'm gonna pop up my little presentation again here. Oh, just went away on me here. There we go. So again, the benefits of MMR Office, you're doing some real-time collection of production KPIs, right? Those key performance indicators. And I showed you it was last week's production data. So you can, you have that history. So you can look back on that. Identify optimization potentials based on real data. So we just walked through that. Being able to look at seeing and understanding what state the machine is in on a regular basis is going to give you some more insight into, bring up some more questions as to, well, where where should I focus my priority on making my manufacturing more efficient here. Reduce machine downtime with detailed malfunction analysis. I showed you that. That's where we click the exclamation point or we zoomed in on the error message. Store and analyze. This is store and analyze the data for 2 years. So on MMR Office, there's actually 2 different levels of MMR. There's MMR Office, which we just looked at, which is the full version. That stores data for up to 2 years. MMR Office Lite is available. That stores data for 30 days. It's a direct IP connection to the machines, and the machines only store the data for 30 days. MMR Office, the full one, which again we were just looking at, stores data for 2 years from a SQL Server database. Also another pro with, or another advantage of MMR Office is you can have up to 20 machines at one time listed. MMR Office Lite, which again saves data for 30 days, can only have 3 machines showing at any given time or connected into MMR Office Lite at any given time. So if you only have 3 pieces of equipment or don't mind plugging in the IP addresses of the machines when you fire it up, then that would be an option too. And then easily visualize machine statuses with graphs and charts. So we had walked through that. I think that again, using the different types of charts, or a picture speaks 1,000 words. So we try to use that to our advantage and give us as much data as possible within the scope of one image. So that was Introduction to MMR Office. Does anybody have any questions? I think TK can, Tamika can hop back on and help me